Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Zimbabwe is a failed state. That is the number one issue that we cannot ignore. And the main reason why it is a failed state, we have failed to hold free, fair, and credible elections. Ever since ZANUPF got into power in 1980, the party has rigged elections to stay in power. The 2008 was the March, let me qualify that, the March 2008 was the nearest the country ever got to holding free, fair, and credible elections. SADC had put a lot of pressure on ZANUPF to make sure that the election process was free, fair, and credible. But what was to happen then was that as the votes were being counted for the March vote, when ZANUPF, or more specifically, Mnangagwa, realized that the party was going to lose, he stepped in, stopped ZEC counting the elections, and what was to follow was 6 weeks of counting counting 5 million votes. The bottom line was he was withering down the opposition's win. That was an electoral coup. And at the end of the 6 weeks, Tsvangirai's win was reduced to 47%, making it necessary to have a runoff. And during the runoff, the country was to see some of the worst electoral-related violence the country has ever seen. Here is Mnangagwa boasting about his role in those elections.
2008 patakaita ma-elections pakaposa papinda Tsvangirai ndandiri election agent ya president. Ma-results abuda tiri party headquarters vamutasa vanga vari secretary vedu ve-administration vamutasa muripi ndafona ndiri kwarusapi komogwenda kwarusapi seka ma-results achibuda kudai vanga aiwa zvako izvo Mnangagwa ndezvako endaenda kumusha ofisi vanga vabisa zvinhu zvavo zvose vatofunga kuti zani yadini yaparara. President ofona zvakamira sei kati ndomamira zvakaita takatodini kateda sei manje mama ndikati abvudzai baba nditaurira baba gadzirai politburo cabinet musarangarira zvimwe zivi gadzirai chi cabinet asi tangoda kuti muzive kuti 2008 ma-results abuda vamutasa vakatiza.
As a country we face a generational transition. Vana vesa vari kuma below 35, they are crying out for help. The country is in a mess. Arusuru, we know we are inheriting a mess. We know this country has been left with nothing.
I'm assuring you that starting from tomorrow, you'll see a different nation from what you have seen or read on the news about these results and everything. Where we are going ahead there, the situation will be very different. What we said to our people, they could not see with their own eyes. We're going to act as we see it fit. We're prepared to go the whole distance.
No,
That year, over 500 people were murdered by the ZANU PF regime. Hundreds of thousands of Zimbabweans were beaten up, raped, or had their properties destroyed. And millions were internally displaced. This is what ZANU PF is prepared to do to hang on to power. SADC could not turn a blind eye to that, and they refused to give ZANU PF political legitimacy. They forced ZANU PF to go into a GNU whose primary purpose was to implement the democratic reforms so that the country could finally move to a situation where there are free, fair, and credible elections. Alas, not even a token reform was implemented. And so the country found itself at the end of the 5-year GNU with ZANU PF still in power, with its carte blanche powers to rig elections untouched. ZANU PF has continued to rig elections to this date. Last year, Mnangagwa blatantly rigged the Zimbabwean elections. And he has boasted about it. And has insisted he doesn't care about what the rest of the world says. This is the tragedy in Zimbabwe. Here is Mnangagwa insisting.
ZANUPF kana ndonyanyisa kufara zvakanaka ukavona vavengi vakwasi kurumbidza nekuchikanganisa ukavona vachiti ZANUPF yakaipa farai because you are doing correct things for your country. Hongu takaita maelections edu kuna vamwe vaitaura zvisina musoro zvikanzi maelections anafamba zvakanaka ndezvavo.
He is blatantly saying there, some people, in this particular case, SADC and the AU election observers, condemned last year's elections as flawed and illegal. And he's saying he doesn't care. There's Zavo. That was shocking enough. But what has been happening ever since was that Mnangagwa has now gone one step further. He wants to export his vote rigging skills to other countries in the region. Why? He's desperate. ZANU PF has enjoyed absolute power. And there's no doubt, of course, that the regime has justified its stranglehold on power in Zimbabwe on the grounds that it fought the liberation war. It's a matter of entitlement. ZANU PF is entitled to rule Zimbabwe. And so when other countries, liberation war sister parties in other parts of the country, of the region, are losing power, the regime is worried. that will only encourage Zimbabweans themselves to say, no, we also want change. And that the regime cannot tolerate. So we have seen a number of cases where ZANUPF has tried to interfere in the electoral process of other countries in the region. On the side of the ruling party, the regime is scared that political change in other countries will only encourage change in Zimbabwe, and it cannot tolerate that. I think this is, I've got on the screen there, a Namibian newspaper. And their headline says it all. Zimbabwe has been interfering in the other countries' elections. More so, the October elections in Mozambique. Yesterday, we discussed that subject, and we played this video showing the regime's involvement. And yet, the regime insists that this was a fake.
Nofara nezvakaita Mozambique muvakidzani wedu wakatidetsera panguva saka hatisi taitadza kuvadetsera kuti tivabetsere kuti vapinda election efreely.
Tabva kunovhoterawo kuMozambique kuti pamwe
nofara nezvakaita Mozambique muvakidzani wedu wakatidetsera panguva saka hatisi taitadza kuvadetsera kuti tivabetsere kuti vapinda election efreely.
Tabva kunovhoterawo kuMozambique kuti pamwewo tingandopinda zvakanaka kana tichidawo kunohodha kana kudi tinotoifarirawo fererimo iyoyo yatavhotera.
Tafara nekuvhotera kwatino kuvhota kwataita kuvhotera vanhu kuMozambique tafara tongosvivira kudai maresults abuda zvakanaka.
Tafara nekuvhota kwataita tichivhota kuMozambique tafara chaizvo. Mozambique nyikawo yatiri padhuze nayo saka tinofanira kuvasapotawo namavhoti edu.
And yet, interestingly enough, the regime insists that it has not interfered in those elections. Of course, it hasn't interfered. And I think it has interfered in such a way that the region can no longer ignore this. And one of the leaders in the region, Ian Khama, the former president of Botswana, has clearly stated that Zimbabwe must be booted out of SADC now that we have got evidence that it has been interfering in the election of other countries in the region. I could not support him more. It will be a pity if SADC were to fail to act in the face of such blatant interference in another country. At the beginning of this discussion, I showed a video of what Mnangagwa did in 2008 in his resolve to hang on to power. we really cannot afford the whole region to be dragged into a similar political crisis just for the sake of hanging on to power. ZANU PF is prepared and has shown that it is prepared to drag Zimbabwe into a political crisis. In 2008, ZANU PF threw all caution to the wind and blatantly rigged the elections, cheated in the March vote, and then carried out what they called Operation Mafotera Papi, in which they used wanton violence, some of the worst election-related violence that the country had ever witnessed, just to retain power. SADC that year, credit where credit is due, could not ignore that political reality. And so they refused to grant ZANU PF political legitimacy. Mugabe considered the possibility of walking out of SADC. He even threatened to leave SADC. But even he realized that after the country had been booted out of the Commonwealth, for it to be booted out of SADC as well was a bridge too far. I think in the circumstances, SADC cannot be found wanting in acting to end this madness by the ZANU PF regime. ZANU PF is a regime that is determined to stay in power to the point where it will drag the whole region into political crisis. And I believe that the logical thing to do for the region right now is to put the regime out of the regional body. We saw on Wednesday the SADC Extraordinary Summit, which was chaired by Mnangagwa himself. It condemned the post-election related violence in Mozambique on the victims. The regime does not accept that the elections were rigged. Nor does it accept that the regime itself was involved. And so the SADC summit came up with a report condemning those who were protesting the rigged elections, calling them terrorists. It is pleasing that the Frelimo government in Mozambique hesitated endorsing the elections results because of the evidence of the rigging, and has since extended an olive branch to the opposition, which the opposition has since accepted. And so this Frelimo government in Mozambique and the opposition are due to meet on the 26th of November, in 4 days' time. One can only hope that they will find each other and come up with a way of resolving this problem of rigged elections. In this circumstance, they may need SADC to help them find each other. The idea that Mnangagwa could be involved in such negotiations is completely out of the question. ZANU PF was involved in the rigging process in the Mozambican elections. How can you invite somebody like that to be part of the SADC delegation? Much more in the capacity of chairperson. Mnangagwa, since August, has assumed the chairmanship of SADC. I think it is high time that SADC get their act together. And in this particular case, they must put ZANU PF or Zimbabwe out of the regional body. There is no other choice. It's bad enough ZANU PF rigged the Zimbabwean elections. It is totally unacceptable that the regime is now rigging elections in the region. Thank you very much for those of you who were able to join, and have a good day, and I hope we'll be able to join us again tomorrow, 6 o'clock UK time, 8 o'clock Zimbabwean time.